You're listening to Brave Girls with Tracy Im, where we choose to empower you to be a better leader, mentor, and coach in the world. We'll share stories of people who have achieved great heights by overcoming adversity and rising to the challenge, all while pursuing their passions. These courageous people will inspire you to have faith in yourself and take bold action. Right here with the host of Brave Girls, Tracy Im.
Episode 42, Be an Ally with Natalie Runyon. On today's show, I interview Natalie Runyon, an inclusive leadership strategist currently based in New York City. Originally from New Orleans, she tells her Brave Girl story of moving to Washington, D.C., earning her MBA in finance, and life as an intelligent analyst. Her corporate path includes time in financial services to include a paid fellowship to help rebuild the Gulf Coast after Hurricane Katrina. She also shares how her volunteer trip to Ghana inspired her passion to create a more inclusive world to include women's advancement and advocating for others. Natalie also holds a coaching certificate that led her to start her side hustle, where she taught other women how to be the CEO of your career. The program she created was repurposed and implemented globally by the company where she currently works and continues to have an impact today. Natalie shares more about the work that she's doing today as a talent, culture, and inclusion leadership strategist, where she amplifies the success stories of women of color in the legal sector through an exclusive digital platform. Natalie talks about how to be an ally in the world today and to be able to create inclusive environments wherever you can. She also shares her advice on the importance of finding community as you pursue your dreams. We talk about why you need coaches, mentors, and guides along the way to advocate for you. I love what Natalie has to say about the workplace and how to navigate the terrain. We also talk about her recommendations for books on leadership and podcasts that she likes to listen to that you may want to check out. I hope you learn a thing or two from my conversation with my friend Natalie on how to be a better ally to others that don't look like you. So let's go and listen to episode 42 with Natalie Runyon. So welcome to Brave Girls with Tracy M. Today I have my friend Natalie Runyon on the phone, on the mic really, and Natalie's an inclusive leadership strategist up in New York, and she has a depth of training in both business, finance, international business, as well as lots of experience in organizational leadership. So welcome to the show, Natalie.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so take me back in time. I know your undergraduate degree was from LSU. So where are you originally from, and how did you kind of make your way to New York?
Yeah, so I grew up in Louisiana, right outside of New Orleans. So that I'm a Louisiana girl through and through. Louisiana is still the place where I've spent most of my life, although New York is coming up where it'll be equal here in another year or two. But I went to LSU, and when I was there, I was part of a sorority, and my first couple of years just to find community, and then I had the opportunity to do an internship in Washington, D.C. between my junior and senior years of college. And that internship really kind of opened me up to a new world. I always had this sense as a child, especially in junior high, that there was a bigger world out there that I wanted to explore. Just as a quick side note, I had an 8th grade reading teacher who created these capsules when we were 13. And then at our 10-year high school reunion, she mailed those out. And I opened mine up, and it said I would be living in New York City. So it was, and I had totally forgotten about that. So I knew I was looking for a one-way ticket out of Louisiana. That summer internship was my ticket. So I knew that I was moving there after college, after my senior year. I worked there for 5 years. I earned my MBA part-time. And at the time, it was about a year after September 11th, and the job market wasn't the best. And I got my MBA in finance, and so I worked for CIA as an intelligence analyst, and all of the jobs locally wanted to put me right back as a government contractor, and I did not want to do that. I knew government service was not for me. So that's when I started expanding my job search to New York, and that's how I wound up here and have been here since the beginning of 2003. So I think I'm on if I'm doing the math correctly, my 16th or 17th year.
Wow. And then you pivoted at some point into sort of the coaching, organizational development, diversity and inclusion realm. Was that like a personal interest and passion that you were kind of following your heart there?
Yeah, so I would say that when I was in financial services, I had joined the Internal Women's Network and really developed a passion for, women's advancement. Also, I had the opportunity to I earned a leadership fellowship, which I was able to go off and work in a nonprofit for a year in 2008. And it was a paid fellowship by my company. So I was essentially went to a nonprofit of my choice. And at the time, it was about 3 years after Hurricane Katrina. And, a lot of the rebuilding efforts had, left the national news. And I knew that I really wanted to give back to my community. So I wound up working for a year on helping to link local nonprofits on the ground to New York foundations. And also as part of that year, I had the opportunity to completely separate, but go to Ghana and lead a couple of volunteers. And from that perspective, I wound up touring after the volunteer week. We wound up touring some country, and probably the most pivotal moment and one of those moments where I was changed as a human being was going and seeing the castles that were on the coast that had served as the points of export for captured Africans during the slave trade in North America. And what stood out to me was that they were held the captured Africans, in terrible conditions, but right above that was the place where the Europeans were worshiping on Sunday. And so that the juxtaposition of those two, here's all this horrible treatment of human beings, and yet, this worship of God, I'll never forget it. I still get chills when I think about it. So that's when I really said, okay, there's something here. And so I became really passionate about women's advancement, but that was really the first step of me saying, okay, but women are not monolithic. We all have different journeys, and women of color in particular have unique experiences that aren't really told in the meta narratives in the media. And so I knew I wanted to kind of specialize in that space, though at the time I didn't really know how. Fast forward a couple of years later, I started in a new company. But in between that, I had the same year that I was doing the work at the nonprofit, I did my coaching certification, and knew that I wanted to try and start a side hustle on training women. And I developed this product called Be the CEO of Your Career. Had the opportunity to work on that on the side, and at the same time, eventually had the opportunity to work on full time. And I had also given birth to my first son in that time frame. And what I learned very quickly was that I loved doing the training, but I didn't love being the CEO, the CMO, the CFO, the COO. And I was spending the majority of my time on that. And so I was like, being a solopreneur is not for me. So from there, I returned to full-time work, burnt out, and so that's when I joined a new company. And about a year of being at that company, it was the beginning of 2013. I got active with the Women's Network. They were looking for some career development programs. I dusted off my Be the CEO of Your Career program and said, here, I have this whole package, and started implementing it. And then, it just kind of blew up internally. So it's still being used today. I had to hand it over to HR because I could not sustain it myself. So when you talk about, was I making money from it? Directly, no, but in terms of the impact that it would have, it probably has had way more greater impact than I could have ever done in the time frame where it's been used. And so it's global. There's a team of facilitators. It has been revamped to be more friendly for remote spaces or the virtual environment. So, just an incredible impact that I never knew was possible, would never have an envision for the program.
Yeah, I think that's when I met you, was you had just created that, and you were out, and you were still on your own, and you were trying to figure out how to get it out into the world. So that's fantastic, kind of like looking back now at your vision, and then maybe it wasn't exactly how you thought it was going to get implemented, but by going in through that organization and the reach that it has, because you do work for a global organization. So it has really probably helped so many people. So,
yeah, I mean, last time I took count, more than 2,000 people had gone through it. So
that's fantastic. That's fantastic. So in your job right now, what's your focus? Is it still on leadership, or is it kind of pivoted to something else? Like you said, you handed that off to them.
Yeah, so now I would say that my day job is probably the closest that I've ever been to truly what I think I've been put on this earth to do, which is my purpose. And, my experience is like, I've always had a vision, and the vision has never worked out. It's always been like, okay, the universe is you're going to go this way. So now I work in marketing, believe it or not, but I'm the talent, culture, and inclusion strategist for the legal, for the legal business for my company. So I get to focus on leadership. I get to focus on diversity and inclusion for women of color, for people of color. I started this role in January 2018. Last year, I had the opportunity to launch a platform called Next Gen Leadership Advancing Lawyers of Color, where we are, amplifying the stories and the success stories of lawyers of color, and at the same time, talking about what are the changes that legal employers need to make from their perspective, right, in order to accelerate their advancement. So from that perspective, in the first 7 months, we had 8,000 or 9,000 readers, and, just an amazing impact. So in particular, the Next Gen Leadership Advancing Lawyers of Color, that's my baby. I really feel like, this is what I am here to do. This is why I exist. And it's just been a phenomenal ride over the last 14 months.
That's fantastic. Yeah. And to be able to be in an organization that can kind of get that message out, because it's not just for your organization, it's for the legal firms that are out in the world that are looking to recognize dimensions of diversity, but also create an inclusive environment. So I'm sure the content that you're putting out, or the events, or however you're doing it to amplify these stories, is helpful to them.
It's an exclusively digital initiative because there's already wonderful live events going on, and I didn't want to compete with them, right? So we just said, okay, let's create a platform that tells these stories and provides the nuggets of wisdom and the success stories in between those live events that you're only going to really hear when you're at those live events. And so not everybody can get to them. So in addition, there's different events, live events for men of color and women of color. There's ethnic bar associations, but again, this is the first exclusive digital initiative that's solely dedicated to lawyers of color. So it includes, stories from ethnic Thai lawyers, ethnic Chinese, second generation Chinese lawyers, in addition to Latinx and African American, so Native American. So we really tried to be intergenerational and also across the different ethnic minorities and across the spectrum that identify as lawyers of color.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I kind of want to go back to your paid fellowship at the nonprofit where you were rebuilding your hometown. What was the biggest takeaway after you were done that fellowship? Did you feel like New Orleans was back on the right path, or looking back on it now, and I know you probably go home every once in a while, kind of what, as you reflect back on that, what's kind of your biggest takeaway?
Well, I remember the Hurricane Katrina, and I'll never forget this because I was working, the company that I was working for had assets in the region, and from a crisis management perspective, that was my job, supporting the decision making. And I remember, watching these media shots where you had people on their roofs, and people who were gathering on bridges and outside the Superdome, and they were mostly Black. And I remember the sense that, like, if those people were white, this would not be happening. And it was kind of the first, like, illuminating moment where I'm like, Black and white people are not, people of color are not treated the same in this country. And that profoundly touched me in a way that I had never experienced. So when I started this initiative and I started going down there and meeting with people, I thought that I had the plan, right? I'd cultivated this plan, I'd done all this reading on it, and I was going in to say, okay, you need to get on board with me because I can help you. A very arrogant mindset, right? And so I remember my first trip down there, it was maybe my second or third meeting that I had with this woman. I'll never forget it. She was this African-American woman. She had on this white suit, I mean, just perfect red lipstick and red fingernails. And she said, "Baby, you don't know shit. You need to sit down and listen."
Wow.
And that was probably the biggest leadership lesson that I had ever experienced, because, someone was telling me like it is, and that I needed to shut up. And the reason why that was important is because it underscored, particularly because I had started the coaching certification, that listening is critical. And then it also showed me that that there was a place for emotional healing before you get to the actual rebuilding. And that so many people had gone straight into the rebuilding, and that there had been so much trauma locally that no one had the ability to truly hear the emotional pain of their neighbors, right? And so they needed people to come down and just listen.
Right.
And so I spent, so that first trip, it completely, like, the plan that I had built, like, threw it out, and I said, okay, I'm just going to listen and I'm going to figure it out from there. So that was probably the biggest takeaway for me, was the importance of listening, in addition to, just the stark reality that, people of color are treated differently in this country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and then when you went to Ghana, what was that all about? You said you were leading volunteers.
It was kind of one of these unique opportunities where the organization needed someone to do it. And I was like, when am I ever going to get a chance to go to Africa again? And so I just raised my hand and said, yeah, I'll do it. And little did I know, I didn't go there with the intention of just being profoundly moved and learning, but it was probably, I also learned a lot because I was there for 10 days, and I was like one of 2 white people that had been, that I had seen that whole time. And I was so uncomfortable, all of these eyes were, and so it gave me the experience where I was the minority for a long time. And so it allowed me to step into the shoes of people of color who are walking in primarily white spaces in the workplace, because that's always been kind of my frame, right? And so from that perspective, I was profoundly moved. And because I had the opportunity to step into the shoes, I realized how mentally, emotionally, physically exhausting that was. I came back and I felt like I had been, I felt like I had mono, right? I mean, that's how exhausted I was. And so the toll that it took on me, and I was like, okay, people of color in the workplace are walking in with this, every day. And, it's probably, and it's normal for them. So they may not even, tap into it, but, certainly I can appreciate and take that with me and establish that as like, how, and come from a place of humility and saying, I want to learn how can I be helpful to you? Because that's truly what I feel like my calling is advocating and amplifying the voices of women of color in the workplace.
So I know you're active also in your community, and you're kind of like me, all about girl power and putting more, women in, seeing more women in just different places, whether it's elected office or whether it's, corporate boards or it's in senior leadership teams or things like that. So what would your advice be to somebody who maybe thinks they can't get there, or, it's not worth trying, or it's going to be too hard? Kind of what would be your coaching advice to somebody who really has the talent and would be a great, elected official or CEO or corporate board member or something of that nature?
When you have more than two people that have asked you to either run or put yourself in line for that promotion, listen. Because that's the universe telling you something, that this is a pathway opening up for you, and to say yes, and to say yes to exploring it. You can, if you decide it's not for you, that's okay, but just say yes to the don't close the door before you even like take the first step. And so that's what I would say. I would say the other thing is like, I like to do things in community, so with other women. And so having that support network and not feeling like I'm alone or in isolation is really, really important. So, find your people. And that takes a lot of research too. So that's not easy. In New York, like I could spend a full-time job, like going to different women's events around this city. Right. So you really have to kind of like, focus, at least when you're starting to try something, and give yourself a deadline, about saying, I've tried this for 6 months. It's not resonating with me. So now I'm going to go try here. So that's what I would say. And any action is better than no action. So take that first step.
Yeah, I think that's really sage advice. I know that a lot of times when there's a job opening or an opportunity for a promotion and there's, 8 criteria, women tend to think, oh, well, if I don't have all 8, I'm not going to apply. And men think that, they have 2 and they're going to apply. It's a different mindset. And so I think it's, don't disqualify yourself before you put yourself out there too.
Yeah. In fact, you know what? I've used the interview process to get in front of senior people just to get to know them. I knew that I had no chance of getting that job, but you know what? I applied for the job just to establish a personal connection and to have a conversation about me with that senior person. That is so valuable, because I may not get the job. They may be thinking about me later, but I can hear what their challenges are. I can, as I come across like different articles or resources or, interesting podcasts, I can send it to them, say, oh, thought about you when I heard this because of this goal. Hope all is well, cheers, Natalie. That stuff goes a long way. So I would actually say, if you don't think you have a chance in getting the job, just go for it anyway, because you're going to get a meeting, particularly if it's internal. Yeah,
I think you're right. And life is so much about relationships.
Exactly.
And so
no one gets to the top on their own. They've always had people helping them, advocating for them, sponsoring them along the way.
Yeah. So talk a little bit more about that, like sponsors, mentors, coaches, guides, why we need them.
Well, I mean, I think we need them because number one, like advocating for yourself is exhausting. So it's always good to have people who are going to do it for you. And you know what, I've even gone to so much to say is like, if there's a person that I know that I know her influence or his influence is going to help me get that first interview, right? I will ask that person that I know well to send an email on my behalf to the person who is the interviewer, recommending me for that job. And that's how I've gotten some of those interviews, to establish those personal connections with senior people. And I'll even go as far as like, here's an email draft for you to consider, and, you know, tweak it to fit your voice, or I'm happy to be, you know, take 15 minutes on a call to make the changes and then get it over to you. So, so I think having those people to support you are incredibly important. In addition, like, you know, going back to the community factor, you need people for sounding boards. And, you know, if there is, and they're going to push you, right? So I have a great story. I thought about it when you mentioned the question about what's the bravest thing you've ever done. I was working for this company. I had been there for about a year. And for a series of reasons, I was not happy. I was overworked, and I knew that I was underpaid relative to my peers. And I had been acting and I had the title interim director. And the interview process had been going on for 8 months, and I hadn't really been taken seriously as part of the interview. So, you know, someone had reached out to me in another organization and said, hey, like, I'd love to recommend you for this job. And I was like, sure, yes. Well, it went very fast. 3 weeks later, I had an offer, right? For an offer for 35% more than what I had been making. And so, by that point, my boss's boss had been told that they were going to be moved on. So they really had no influence or decision-making power. So I remember I had to go to another office. I camped out in front of, sorry for the background noise.
That's okay. It's New York.
Yeah.
It's awesome. Hope everybody's okay.
Who knows? I'm trying to let it pass. Okay. So I had a mentor at the time, and so I told her about it, and she was like, Natalie, you are going to go camp out in front of this person's office, and you're going to force your way into that office. And I was so nervous. And so I had traveled up there, and every hour, she would email me or something and say, have you talked to them yet? Have you talked to them yet? Have you talked to them yet? And I was like, no. And I was calling her saying, I'm so scared. And then finally she said, don't fucking call me again until you've talked to her. Click. And that's when I was like, okay. And so I went in, and, you know, she was packing up because she, was leaving the office to return home. She wasn't based out of this metro area. And she goes, I really don't have time. I said, you pack, I'll talk. And I said, you know, I have an offer, and I really want to stay here, but I feel like it would be disservice to my career and to my family if I don't seriously consider it. And she said, okay, here's my cell number, call me tomorrow. And this was a Friday. So I called her Saturday morning. I shared the details with her, and she goes, what do you want? And I was like, if you match it, the offer, like, we're good. She calls me back an hour later, goes, yep. So literally I walk in Monday morning, I'm doing the same job. I've got the title, and I've got 35% higher pay. So, you know, that was an instrumental moment that substantially impacted my compensation, right? Because of a mentor who just had to, like, be abrupt and call me out and say, don't call me again. And so, you know, a very successful outcome.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the best mentors and coaches, they're there to call you out on stuff and hold you accountable and push you.
Yeah.
Yeah. To be the best version of yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely. So the other question I had for you is, are there specific challenges you think women face in the financial services community? Because that seems to be where you've spent a lot of your career over the last, 15 years or so, or even just women in general in corporate America. and any kind of advice that you give to people when, they maybe start to whine about things.
Well, I don't like the word whine, because I think sometimes the frustration can be legitimate, because there's only so much a woman can do, right? If they don't have a supportive manager, if they don't have a supportive organization that understands that inclusion is about everyone else, and creating the opportunities and checking your biases that are handed to us as a society, about what's appropriate and what's not. So,
yeah, I think you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
The whole unconscious bias is,
and it's also the culture. I mean, when you think of a leader, who pops in your head? A white man, right? And I'm not saying that to call out white men, but if you look at industrial America post World War II, that was who was in the workforce. It was white men, right? So anything that's different, and that's the leadership behaviors, that's the picture, that's the image that has been around for 70 years. So it's not good or bad. It just is. It's a reality. So anything that's not that is going to be viewed as not as good enough, and that's unfortunate. So with that backdrop, I always say, don't ever stop advocating for yourself. Find other people to do it for them. Build those relationships. I've been in situations where layoffs have decimated my network. So you always have to be, and I wasn't laid off, but it decimated my internal network and my internal champion. So I've been through 2 different experiences where that has impacted. And so, you always have to be investing in it, from that experience. I've also been on the other end where, I was the unfortunate, person on the other end, with a layoff. And man, I knew it was coming, and it still was a huge hit to my ego. Right. So, so it's real. Sorry, I'm not answering your question, but so I think it's always advocate for yourself. If you think that it's not, if you have to choose between being liked and being respected, go for respect. Because what I've always said is I can be perceived as aggressive or assertive in decision making, but if anybody comes back and says that I'm a witch or I'm a bitch, my argument is like, well, really, is that true? Because this is how I give back to the organization as a volunteer leader. Here, if you look at my record of experience in leadership and how I'm, doing my J job in addition to giving back to the organization, I would find that hard to come to that conclusion. So it's about respectfully, pushing back and saying, actually, that's not right. So that's how I've always managed both, is I can be, very hard and have to make tough decisions and live with those. And, and I have to put on the hard face to make those decisions. And inside I am crumbling because of the emotional impact. But I also channel that energy and say, I'm going to give back, and I'm going to do all that I can to help, the community of women, because we need one another we need to flood that pipeline, at the heads of corporate, private, and public institutions. And I love, what happened in 2018, because that's what happened for elected office. We had more women running than ever. We had more women running for Congress than ever. And then we had a record number of women have elected. And that's what needs to happen in the corporate and private space.
Yeah, I love what you say about go for being respected versus being liked. I think there's definitely merit in that. And I love that. And so is there any particular leadership book that you recommend to your people that you mentor, or younger women that you are mentoring in the workplace, or men, that you think is just sort of like a seminal leadership book or motivator or anything like that? Is there anything that stands out for you?
Ooh.
I know there's thousands of leadership books out there.
Yeah, there's
or a particular
so
author or anything like that.
I like, from a business leadership perspective, I like Good to Great by Jim Collins. It's, was published
Classic.
back in the mid
Yep.
2000s. I love, Reshma Saljani has a new book about bravery coming out. She is the CEO for Girls Who Code. And I was a volunteer on her campaign in New York City when she ran for public advocate here. She also has another book that she put out in 2011 called Girls Who Don't Wait in Line, or something about not waiting in line. So I thought that one was good, and it's very kind of practical. 150 pages, you could read it in a couple of days. So I would say those are the ones that come to mind.
Yeah. And then do you have any favorite podcasts that you like to listen to? It doesn't even have to be about leadership, but is there any podcast that you're kind of big fangirl of?
Yeah. So I listen to Code Switch, which is NPR.
Okay.
That's where I learn about the different experiences of people of color in the country, and they go and provide historical context. So I really like this when I was listening to it working out, and they were talking about like the beauty industry and all of the South Korean, craze right now among young people, and talking about the evolution of that from the South Korea perspective. So that's really fascinating. I also love The Will to Change by Jennifer Brown. She's a really well-respected diversity and inclusion consultant that she's written a book and has another book coming out, but she's been my shero on anything around how to be an ally, how to be effective ally, how to be an intersectional ally, because I think as a person, I'm a woman, yes, but I also have privilege, and I can, in more times than not, be an ally to someone else. And when I do need allies as a woman, right? But I find that I can be an ally to someone else more times than I need myself an ally. And so The Will to Change is another one. I love the NPR Politics podcast, so I listen to that one. And there's one that I listen to daily. It's called Optimal Living Daily. It's a daily on personal development, minimalism. And there's also a personal finance one. It's called Optimal Finance Daily. So
great. Those are great recommendations. So my finale question is always, what's the bravest thing that you've ever done, and how does it inspire you today? So you told the one story, but now I'm not going to let you get away with that being your story. So if you really dig deep and you really think about other times in your life, where you've really had to dig deep, surrender, and really, maybe you were transformed as a result of a decision that you had to make, or something of that nature. So is there any other opportunity, or are there any other times when you felt like you were really trying to be a brave girl and you did it?
Well, I'll give two examples. So one is it's more of a series of experiences where I've always had this profound inner voice around professional decisions that pointed me in the right way. And I've always followed that voice, even though there's been a ton of other times where I followed my voice and it didn't work out well. But particularly in major professional decisions. So the decision to move to DC, the decision to move to New York, the decision to, follow this, after Hurricane Katrina, for example, and when the public service fellowship announcement came out, I knew I was going to get it. Like something just told me inside, you're going to do this, Natalie. And so that was like really like exciting. And then, so that's kind of one. I've always followed that voice, even when, all the odds were like, who are you to think that? But I've never listened to the inner critic. The other one I would say is really about being open and honest about my own racial biases. And I've had to tell stories that I'm not proud of. It's taken me a long time. So an example is 12 years ago when I first came back from Ghana, I started to really kind of notice that this behavior where I would cross the street if there was a group of brown and black men who were walking towards me. And and when it occurred to me, I was like, that's not who God is calling me to be as a human being. That's making a decision based on fear. And I really didn't like that aspect about it. So, what I had the opportunity, the street that I live on, there is a halfway house for young men, and it happens to be mostly men of color in that halfway house. And so at 7:30 in the morning when I'd be leaving for work, I would, in that instinct to clamp down on my purse and cross the street, and I would relax myself. I would, shake my head, shake the tension out of my arms, and I would walk and I would stay on the street and I would say, good morning, how are you? And through the discipline of just doing that over a few months, my fear dissipated. So I do know that these societal biases that are handed to you can be changed with intentional effort. And so that happened a long time ago. It took me 8 years to be able to tell that story. I told that story for the first time live 2 years ago. And so now I just tell it because, there was a lot of shame obviously coming from that. So that's probably the biggest bravery thing that I've done, because it's just honest and it's vulnerability. And, I thought that I was going to, and the response is like, thank you from, people of color who have said, thank you for acknowledging it, that there's just been some, just the acknowledgement of it is, has been really, has really important. So the feedback that I've gotten. So,
well, it's like you were out of alignment with what you were maybe pursuing in terms of your purpose. And so
yes.
I give you a lot of credit for that self-awareness, and then the courage to then speak your truth, right?
Yeah.
Even if you were ashamed.
Yeah.
But it had to be kind of freeing in some ways too.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it was very freeing. And now, I tell the story whenever I get the opportunity, because I do feel like, people have told me like, Natalie, we need you to tell that story because it might encourage others to actually come to terms with their own, internal stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, if if I have my, people that I care about, especially the pastor of my church, I know you don't want to talk about politics, but my faith has been a huge instigator for my personal growth in that space. Then, okay, I'll listen to you and share it.
Right. Yeah. And you said something earlier and I was like, boom, that's it, is that, you're an ally. That's your purpose. Your purpose is to give voice to these people whose voices can't be heard. Yeah. And so you're like the conduit for that. So I think, congratulations for figuring all that out through a series of experiences over time and for the work that you're doing out there in the world. So I just wish you the best of luck. I think it's fantastic that you're the CEO of your career, took off like it did within an organization that's been able to touch 2,000 women. That's huge. And, I just wish you the best of luck as you continue to be an inclusive leadership strategist and to share your voice and to put the programs out there that have been really entrusted to you to bring out into the world at this point in time. Well, thank you. Thank you for letting me share my story with you and your listeners. It's been in such a critical, painful and enjoyable experience. But, that's life. So it comes with, I feel alive, after a conversation. And that's always the hallmark of like, was that a growing moment or was that a standing still moment? And I'm energized by growing moments. So thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Brave Girls with Tracy M. as much as I did creating it. Each show is produced with you, the listener, in mind, as you look for inspiration and motivation from other brave souls as you pursue your desires. I'd love to hear your feedback, so please leave me a review on iTunes. I read every one. And check out my website, tracym.com, for more free resources. You can also join my list and sign up for my newsletter right from the homepage. Until next time, stay strong, believe in your dreams, and go do something brave.
We appreciate you joining us for this episode of Brave Girls with Tracy M. and hope that you enjoyed the show. For more information about today's episode, as well as additional free resources to help you achieve greatness in your life, visit tracym.com and sign up for our mailing list. Until next time, dream big, believe in yourself, and let your brilliance shine as only you can do.